Welcome to The Secret Witch Show, the podcast providing a safe and alchemical altar space of conversations which help powerful women escape a half-hearted, spiritless society and rediscover the freedom of living a wildly magical life. Every other week, we explore how to cast aside the wounds of shame, guilt, and fear connected with fully being yourself, so you can grant yourself permission to stop hiding, ground soulfully back into your body, illuminate your whole soul desires, tend your soul, rediscover and reclaim your powerful gifts, express your magic, and manifest your wildest alchemy. There's no better place to become who your heart longs to be. This is where we will guide you into liberation. I'm your host, Nicole Barton, and I'm so excited to dive in. Oh my, I cannot wait to share this episode with you today, wild ones. I'm saying wild ones, you may either love being called a wild one or deeply resist it, and both are indicative this episode will be healing for you. Welcome. I have something very exciting to share too. We have our upcoming healing journey with Archetypal Looper, or she-wolf in other words, to share today, which begins on the 2nd of May. Looper is a beautiful journey into our inner wildness. And by this, I don't mean our rebel, as wildness is often associated with in the healing world, but our authentic, true, vulnerable expression, or as I'm calling it, our wildness from love. She-wolf or Looper helps us honour our truth and nurture our soul so we can go on to open more deeply to the full expression of our gifts as healers. We're beginning soon, so if you're feeling the call, head to nicolebarton.co.uk/Looper, L-U-P-A. On The Secret Witch Show today, though, I explore the juicy topic of one of the most common fears of becoming a healer, teacher or guide, the fear of judgment and rejection, and how to explore it so you can share your gifts authentically. I explore the archetypal remedy that you can harness to begin to unconditionally love and approve of yourself enough not to need approval, sharing a vulnerable story about my own experience of rejection and how going into the experience of rejection and judgment helped me heal my fear. In this episode, we explore the 3 stages of reclamation of our wild, authentic, true expression, why it's important for healers that we are authentic, and the signs that we are being called to heal our fear of judgment and rejection, and the most important thing to do as a beginning step into this self-healing. Let's dive in. Hello, magical ones. Or should I say wild ones this episode, though you may or may not resonate with being wild. Many women who are here to be healers are needing to reclaim a sense of wildness, and when there's that kind of call to reclaiming that sense of wildness, often there will be this sense of like fear and judgment, fear and rejection, yet longing to share our gifts authentically. Essentially, the way I see wildness is that it means authenticity. So, hello, wild ones. And this is a really juicy topic because it is speaking in this episode to one of the core wounds of all aspiring healers. And there's a particular, I always kind of theme each episode around a particular remedy. I don't know whether you know that, but if you listen regularly, sometimes I do say like this episode is themed around this. So the remedy that we are going to be theming this episode around is she-wolf, which I'll share more about in a little while. I was tempted to leave her a little bit of a surprise then, but actually no. Let's just share the intention for the episode. So it is about, well, actually, I also create a vision for each episode. So let me share that with you as well, because it feels like the vision for this particular episode today is wildness. It's wildness, it's vulnerability, it's self-motherly love, it's truth, and it's softness. And these are all things, qualities that help us to heal our inner healer's fear of judgment and rejection so that we can share our gifts authentically. So I'm going to dive in, and really it's in many ways it's a challenging one, because ultimately there's no avoiding that the only way to ever truly heal and liberate our fear of judgment and rejection is that we eventually have to lean in and share our gifts and move through this, whatever the material for liberation is that arises as we do. And the good news is that there's like a whole journey of like what we can learn to heal and liberate for ourselves in our personal lives in order to be able to do that. So I have done that whole process. I've journeyed with deep material of liberation, being shamed, being rejected, being judged, being called a cult leader. If you know me, you'll be like, what the hell? Being called a charlatan, etc., etc., which I'll share more about in this episode today. But as I said, the good news is that what's needed before we do kind of take that leap into fully expressing our unique remedy, our gifts into the world, is that, and start sharing those, is that there is this personal healing that can help us sharing that feel less edgy. So we can begin with some more tender first steps, some more tender personal healing first steps that help us to begin to own our wild, true, authentic expression. Whether you're someone who feels that you're not wild, or whether you're someone that feels that you are wild, but is still struggling to show gifts in a way that has impact. And I'm going to go into the potential reasons why that might be in this episode. But in essence, this kind of personal healing around our true, wild, authentic expression is what I'd call one of the surface layers that all healers need to be able to work with in some way, whether that's through this path, whether that's through another path. Healing our wildness, healing our true expression is one of the common wounds that healers are here to heal before they can actually share their gifts with the impact that they want. And so it's one of the surface layers that help us to be able to take that leap of being able to lean in and share our gifts. And it makes so much sense when we think about the wound of the witch. So typically, sensitive women who are here to be healers will have the wounding of fearing judgment and rejection. And there are 3 common fears that show up, which I talk about in my starter pack and talk about in all my resources. That when you're just landing here for the first time, like wondering where to go, like there's loads of resources, and I'd recommend the starter pack as like almost the tender first steps. Like there are 3 common fears in that starter pack listed, and that I journey you through, that come up around being a healer. There's approval, there's control, and there's security. It tends to be one of those 3 things that's like the root of all of the other fears. This wounding around judgment and rejection often links back to the underlying fear of losing approval for being our authentic selves. Now, that fear can often have women thinking, okay, maybe I'm not here to be a healer. And it actually doesn't mean that at all. My unique point of view is that this is the exact sign you are here to be a healer. You're experiencing that wounding because it's the wounding of a healer. And so my point of view is that you've come so far in your healing journey already. It's likely if you've landed at my door, you've done quite a lot of healing before. You've done so much healing, probably explored all the kind of quick fix, what I like to call quick fix healing routes, and maybe even started to explore some of the depth healing. But it's likely that you've done that and you've been deep in the work of healing. You probably still are deep in the work of healing, and there's just still some more personal healing to do of your healer wounds. And when I say there's more healing to do, I don't mean the quick fix type of healing, the real magical healings. This is the work of alchemy. And it's likely that this particular wound that we're talking to of judgment and rejection is the biggest healer wound there can be. Fear of judgment and rejection is like the ultimate witch wound. Like she was, if you think about the witch as an archetype as well, she was burned at the stake for being her true self. She would share her magic, she would share her healing, she would share her like apothecary, her being of an apothecary, talking about archetypal apothecary. She would share that medicine into the world, and then people would throw stones at her, they would hang her, they would chase her out the village. And so there's this like inbuilt for healers, kind of like ancestral piece, ancestral witch wound, the fear of being outcast, chased out the village, or tortured and killed for living our truth. And it makes sense that we would carry this down into our own bodies, because there's this whole piece about epigenetics. Like epigenetics is the way that our ancestors' DNA, like they had things happen to them and their DNA would literally change in response to it, and that would get passed down. So if you think about the witch wound literally impacting the DNA of our ancestors and getting passed down the line of healers, this like makes total sense as to why our bodies would now feel the fear of sharing our medicine, our body is essentially remembering the burning times. Our body holds the trauma like an animal. If you've ever read Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger, like you'll see that kind of gets stored in the body. And like animals, we need to like shake that out, move it, dynamize it in order to heal it. But we've been conditioned out of that animalistic instinct. So our bodies will hold on to that trauma because we've caged ourselves in a society where that's not welcome, until we begin that journey of healing and liberating ourselves, returning to our bodies and healing ourselves from that fear of judgment and rejection for being our true selves. And there's a whole journey of that. I've worked deeply with the witch. I mean, you could probably tell that from the fact that she's the foundation of our whole path, hence the show being called The Secret Witch Show. There's a particular aspect and flavour of the witch, which is the healer that we guide and support. But this is probably one of the most important episodes I've ever done. It's one of the most significant wounds that healers have. And really the answer to like how we heal our inner healer's fear of judgment and rejection so we can share our gifts authentically lies in learning to heal ourselves of this surface layer and also ancestral layer. Like there's a deeper layer to this, but we're going to focus on like the surface layer and how it presents in our personal lives, so that we can share our gifts. So essentially, before we dive into anything else, what I want to talk about is how you'll know that you're being called to heal this layer. When we talk about surface layer, there's in our path, there's what I call a soul map. Everyone has their own unique soul map. They're here with a particular purpose. They'll have their own unique set of remedies that they're here to work with in order to heal themselves so they can share their gifts into the world. There are 4 layers of different remedies that we can have. So there's our birth constitution, that's who we're naturally born as. There's our soul remedy, which is like our core wound that alchemizes into our gift and becomes our niche. There's our surface layer wounds, which are the kind of like the layers that are blocking us from expressing our gifts in the world. And there's ancestral layers, which are also blocking us from expressing our gifts in the world. But the surface ones tend to be more personal. The ancestral ones also tend to be like more ancestral. And so this is a surface layer wound that we're talking about today. How will we know that we're being called to heal this kind of surface wound layer? Well, for a start, you'll know on some deeper level, some kind of soul level, this like magical pull that you keep having. It's like, okay, go over here and explore this. Like you'll know that you have some kind of gifts, some sort of more meaningful purpose to share with the world. But simultaneously, you will likely fear judgment and rejection, which is why you're listening to this episode, which can impact you at actually different stages of your healer journey into your gifts. It can either hold you back from even opening to your gifts and knowing what they are. So right at the beginning, like this wound shows up, like even stopping you from even knowing that you have gifts. I've seen women who come here and like, okay, cool, I really want to heal my wild expression, or I really want to heal like my power, but I don't think I want to be a healer. And then they go deeper and deeper and deeper, and they're like, oh my God, I'm here to be like a herbalist, or I'm here to be this, and this is my particular flavour of that. Like when you talk about our unique gifts, like it's our core wound that we're here to help people with as we heal and alchemize that for ourselves. But like people have really started thinking, okay, I'm going to come into this for personal healing, like kind of rejecting the idea of even being a healer, and then later discovering, okay, now I get why I was called here. Like I had no idea, and it was because of this wounding of like being like rejected, being judged. Now I've healed that. Hell yes, I'm here to be a healer. So it can really hold us back from even opening our hearts to what we're here for. But it can also show up later in the path as we begin to like create offerings, start to share our unique point of view in the world, start to share our journey in the world. Like it's holding us back from expressing our authentic stories in the world, our authentic gifts in the world. And it can show up in lots of different forms in the path as well. But in essence, both of these phases will require healing of our inner wild. Another way that you'll likely feel that you're being called to heal this layer is there's this kind of deep sensitivity. Now, this goes with being a healer. It's another one of the wounds of being a healer. And there will be this sense of like feeling more than other people in the mundane world. Often that can leave us feeling overwhelmed. And often we can also tend to have wild emotions with that sensitivity. Like we feel everything. So we'll have wild emotions. This might be the only way that we know that we're wild. For some of you, others will know that you're wild. And might feel there's like this sense of like, oh, my wild's too much. Like we will have wild emotions that typically, if we're here to heal this layer, we will suppress, we will shame ourselves for when they explode out, because we like have held on to them, tried to keep them in, and tried to like maintain this perfect positive like way of being, and it just explodes because we can't do that anymore. And there will be also this part of us that either kind of dishonours our own needs, dishonours our boundaries, runs around people pleasing because we fear the judgment, we fear the rejection, and we'll contort ourselves into boxes to avoid being judged or rejected. So AKA, what I would describe this as, and this is part of She-Wolf's kind of medicine or remedy, is like playing the good girl. Playing the good girl, doing what's expected, being frustrated with our dull, grey lives that we can't stand anymore. And I say this from experience because this is where I have been, this is where I've journeyed. Of course, on the other hand, so I said either or, like you might be the good girl, but you might also have had enough of playing the good girl. You'd be like, God damn it, I am not doing that anymore. And so you will rebel and reject everyone else. So like there's this sense of like putting on a mask, isolating ourselves so that no one can penetrate us. Like, and often that's kind of deemed in the self-help world, in the kind of quick fix healing world, as healed. But this is not healed. This still wants some deep love for the true, authentic, vulnerable, soft, feminine self-expression of your unique gifts to be able to make the impact that you've come here to make. And the reason why I say that is like rebel is armor. It's like we've put on this kind of metallic armor, and we're like rejecting, pushing people away by being this rebellious version of us. And to a degree, like there's no shame in this, by the way, like that is needed in the reclamation of our wild. Often it's like we have to kind of swing from one end of the pole to the other. And people can't feel our true, authentic archetypal remedy or medicine or gift until we serve that gift cleanly, free of wounding, free of shadow, free of rebel, free of good girl, from love and truth. So I call She-Wolf's medicine like wildness from love. And another sign that you might be called to that, to healing this fear of judgment and rejection and reclaiming a wild, is this sense of like disconnecting from our bodies. If you think about the witch and how like by being in communion, in connection with her body, with the wisdom of her body, like we learn to disconnect from that, to shut it down, particularly as sensitive healers. Like we haven't allowed our true selves, we haven't allowed our wisdom, we've disconnected from our bodies to avoid hearing our true wild instinctive wisdom. And because of that, it's likely you're also exhausted. You might feel burned out. You might feel shattered from playing the good girl or the rebel. That's quite exhausting too. That sucks our energy. And so there may also be this like deep longing, this deep resonance, what I'm saying about reclaiming your wild, true, authentic expression or your wildness from love. And I think there's a real importance in the words from love, because there's so much thought about like reclaiming our wildness that can feel like hardcore, that feel like exhausting. Like, oh, I don't want to reclaim my wildness. That sounds like hard work. And yet, when we think about reclaiming our wildness from love, that feels so much softer. It's like wrapping ourselves in Mama She-Wolf's fur. So, the archetypal remedy for this, of course, as I've mentioned already, is She-Wolf, or Lupa, as I'm calling her. That's the remedy herself, the archetypal remedy herself is called lac lupinum, actually, which is She-Wolf Mama's milk. So I'm going to talk more to her. But in essence, She-Wolf as an archetype is the mama wolf. Now, we don't need to be a mama to work with her. This is an energetic. She's the mother. She's the mama wolf. She's the remedy that we work with in the archetypal apothecary path that helps us to move through this layer of wounding, of fear of rejection, fear of judgment. And she's calling us to feel, heal and reveal our true authentic nature, to reclaim our wildness, to strip back all the layers of like pretense that we put on ourselves and show up fully, truthfully as ourselves. And as I mentioned, she's the remedy of lac lupinum. So we're calling her Lupa everywhere, and she's she-wolf in essence, but Lac lupinum is the authentic archetypal remedy. She's she-wolf mama's milk. So this is the ultimate symbol of our animalistic wild expression, but in a really nurturing, wild feminine way, like a mama to her cubs. There's like this real protective, instinctual, unconditionally loving bond that a mama has with her cubs, and that can offer us healing. Like, we may not have felt that unconditional loving bond from our own mothers. Like, there's this deep sense of like cures like, and that's what we're here for. So she-wolf is wild, she's truthful, she's instinctual, she's in tune with her body, she's in tune with her feminine nature and her spirit. And we can learn her themes from mythology, where she's known to have nursed and sheltered twins Romulus and Remus when they were abandoned in the wilderness. So this sense of like fear of judgment and rejection is a sense of like abandonment. She's a symbol as well of the ultimate unconditional motherly nurturer, as I said. Like, the nurturer of our souls as well feels really important to share about she-wolf. And she's also the sacred symbol of union with our true voice. If you think about a wolf howling, like, this is about the reclamation of our true voice, of our wild soul expression, even when it doesn't make any sense, or especially when it feels inconvenient. I think I shared, or I might not have done actually, but when I was planning out the remedies for the year, she-wolf was meant to come later. And then one day I just got nudged. I was finishing Aurum, and she-wolf came in and she was like, I'm next. And I was like, oh, well, that's inconvenient. No, you're not. And I tried to argue with her and be like, no, you're coming later in the year. This is just not what I want right now. There's some other remedy. And she was like, no, I'm coming now. I was like, okay. And it was really, really inconvenient because we planned it out. Like, logically, it made sense to have her later in the year. And then she was there. She was like, no, I'm coming now. And there was this like sacred wildness that was like unconditional love, but like, I am here. I was like, okay, I can't, there's no arguing with you. Like, the spirit of she-wolf, you don't want to argue with. So she literally came in and was like, I'm coming now. And so here she is. And women are already beginning to join her, and I'm excited to lead a journey with her in May. But she's ultimately like here to show us how to lovingly honor our wild souls and our full expression. By that, we don't mean like go out and start sharing like, unless this is a line for you and that's where you are in your journey. It's not about like going out and starting to share our message with the world, unless that's where you are. It's often even just about those tender first steps into like hearing our own souls. Like, what is it that we're here for? What do we really want in life? And hearing our wild yeses, but also hearing our wild no's. Like, what's in the way of us actually taking aligned action to honour our soul expression? Like, that's what she's here for. But anyway, back to she-wolf and her shadow, in her unhealed expression, in her wounding. This is a woman who will feel a deep call to living her wild soul truth, but is easily distracted from her soul will by the mother wounding of being pulled into every other direction by others. She will also show up in that she feels split between playing the good girl and the rebel, like I've talked about, and has this sense of like feeling on the edge of society, like the lone wolf. But also feeling like a trapped free spirit in a disconnected world. There's a sense of like restriction and taming, or also like complete isolation. So it's like this really strange dynamic where we kind of like want to be on our own, but also feel abandoned, and therefore like want to be with other people. But then like, oh, now we're being outcast by other people. Like, there's just this dynamic that we go round and round in, which is very she-wolf. Again, we can sometimes rebel with an expression that isn't really truth. That could be like critical, blaming, like demanding our needs be met because we haven't honoured them in the full way that we need to. She can lack confidence. She can feel inhabited. She can want to hide. She can wear a mask of like overinflated confidence that isn't real. And she has this deep sensitivity in her body to what's aligned, but ignores and overrides it. So there's this like deep sense of mistrusting her instinctive feminine body, shaming those like guttural howls of her body, soul, and wild intuition. So there's like this sense of like feeling the deep call to being a healer, but like, no, that can wait over there. That's too scary. Let's just leave that in the corner. And mistrusting and not feeling safe around others as well. It's like this sense of fearing being hunted, a bit like the witch as an archetype that we were talking about earlier. The sense of as well being taken advantage of. Often women can fear being taken advantage of. And there can also be like this big people-pleasing piece, this over-mothering of others, losing our own character, losing our own voice to fit in, suppressing our emotions, especially sacred rage. And there's this fear of like speaking our truth, or our emotions coming out as like harsh wolf bite meltdown when angry or emotional. There's also this sense of like fearing honouring our no, or aggressively setting no's in a way that doesn't feel loving. So this is wildness from love. This is where that comes from. And there's this sense also of fearing being judged as too wild or too much, whilst also feeling not enough. It's very much persecution. It's wanting to stay approved of and suppressing our truth. And that disconnection from our body cycles, bodies, rhythms, our wild truth, also often has a yearning for the wild, a yearning for nature, like a yearning for being in the outdoors. And there may also be this kind of sense of bonding disconnection from our own mother as well that shows up. So there's like often a sense of not having received the nourishment that we needed. And also like can fear being outcast from the pack. However, in the golden expression, which is the healed expression of black lupinum or she-wolf or lupa, in her alchemy state, she knows how to fully honour her truth. This is what she learns. She learns how to honour her truth, the truth of her soul. She learns how to honour her wild no, but from pure unconditional love. And she will show us a place beyond playing the good girl or the rebel, where we can come to be the full, loving, wild expression of our soul. So she-wolf feels, heals and reveals all that needs to be seen in deep communion with her feminine body, with her instinctual signals, with full honouring of her wild emotions, her sacred rage, being the alchemist of truth, and the builder of deep intimacy that has a woman move from the edge of society to full deep connection in her village. So the she-wolf honours her deep wisdom, her body rhythms, her independent needs and boundaries. She shares her voice confidently with the nurturing love of a wild mama who also lovingly tends her cubs. Ultimately, she-wolf calls us into reclaiming our wildness from love, really honouring our truth, nurturing our soul, so that we can heal our inner healer's fear of judgment and rejection and share our gifts authentically. So that kind of whole journey with unconditionally loving our truth is really what she's about. That's really what we're here for. And there's kind of like some stages of wild reclamation and real authenticity that I have illuminated that women kind of go through on this journey. So what I want to distinguish here is really the piece around the good girl, the rebel that I've spoken to already. And there's like stages to alchemy of our true expression, which she-wolf can help with. The first one is beginning to heal the good girl, like beginning to illuminate patterns around where we're showing up in that she-wolf energy of good girl. So we begin to work with she-wolf, and I guide women into this in journeys, but there's like even just being with the illumination of what I'm talking about now and noticing where it's showing up in your own life is really helpful. Like there's this like starting to illuminate, hold up a mirror, use she-wolf to hold up a mirror to the aspects of ourselves that are playing the good girl, like noticing that. It's like stage one. Stage two is like rebelling. Rebelling is part of that swing. Often we have to rebel to begin to liberate our true expression. Might later regret saying that as I lead she-wolf. Everyone's listened to it and be like, okay, I'm here to rebel. And it is often needed. It is often needed. But the third stage of wild reclamation is really where the real gold is, because as we learn that the real healing isn't found in good girl, isn't found in rebel, it's found in learning to shed both of those skins, like the good girl skin, the rebel skin, the animal skins, shedding those and dropping our bark and bite and learning to soften into vulnerable expression. You know, if you think about a she-wolf, she doesn't really have an agenda. She's not able to like think like humans do. Like she's just the raw, full, true expression of herself. And for us, that is the hardest thing to open to. When we're at mid-trigger, when we're wanting to close, like when we're in wounding, like to unconditionally love ourselves in our triggers and wounding rather than biting is a challenge. It takes courage. But the important thing to note is that to become truly wild doesn't mean to become rebel. It means to become stripped back, to become naked, to bare our souls, to stand in our truth, to howl our gifts into the world, to not to do that unapologetically, to not like want to not even respond to those who are questioning, or not to respond to them from love, but not in a way that's like rebellious. To stand there without a mask, vulnerably, in the wild, authentic fullness of who we are, even and especially amidst the fear of being rejected, of being judged. Like, the more that we can cultivate that, and this is part of what the remedy offers, is the capacity to take those small next steps, like each tiny little step of something towards like showing a little bit more of our soul, and allowing the possibility that that might be judged, that might be rejected, and seeing that actually we're still okay. Like that evidence builds confidence. It's like evidence to inform our confidence that we can be our true wild selves. And a lot of women will experience that. If you've journeyed with me before, there's like a real group dynamic that is created in the journeys that I run and lead. And that group dynamic is so intentional. It's so intentionally created in a way that creates a space for women to practice showing up in their world expression from a like really tender, tiny first step. And it might not even feel tiny actually whilst you're in it. There's like this sense of like hugeness in sharing in a group. But like that's what is on offer. Those and that's what's important as we start to liberate and heal this kind of piece around judgment and rejection. And I'm going to talk a little bit to my own journey because, and I want to share like a vulnerable detail here. I want a vulnerable story of my life because there's been so much reclamation in my own journey with She-Wolf. Like I could probably talk for like 10 hours or more on this. And yet there was one particular incident, which I don't think I've actually shared on. I might be wrong. I often forget what stories I share. But this one's quite a vulnerable one. And I remember once, I commonly share pretty vulnerable details of my life all over, but I wanted to find something that still felt like there was some deep vulnerability in it. Sometimes I've shared so many stories that over and over again that they kind of lose that level of like intimacy and vulnerability because I get so used to telling that story that there's like almost like a disconnection from the story itself. So I wanted to be something that was energetically alive. And that's not to say that the telling of the story isn't potent, but there's just like, I really wanted this to be in my heart as I shared it. So I remember once writing an article for Tiny Buddha blog. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was very, very popular many years ago. And I think it still is actually. But I haven't written for them for a while. And I wrote an article for them. I wrote a few articles for them, but this particular one was about my relationship. And it went out to over 12 million people. And before I wrote that article, I had made the intention and actually taken the aligned action to run it past my family, run it past my ex-husband before I submitted it. Because it contained details about them. So I always, when I speak about certain people, I always feel like it's not my story to tell. So like I always check first, are you okay with this? So I'd run it past my family and I'd run it past my husband at the time beforehand because it contained details about them. And they'd been like, yep, that's all fine, that's all good. So I sent it off to be published. And when it came to be published, I was going through a divorce from this husband. And they thought because of that I should have pulled it. And they were deeply, deeply angry with me, both my husband and my family. And yeah, in my heart, like it felt so deeply true and so deeply important and aligned to share my heart and my vulnerability. And they were fuming. They were furious with me. And I remember being at the time like deeply heartbroken because instead of being celebrated, like to me, this was huge. I'd like been visible and in my full expression, my full vulnerable expression to over 12 million people. And instead of being celebrated for that, I was being outcast. Like one of my family literally deleted me as a friend on social media. Like they were livid with me for sharing this article. And I remember my husband being like fuming and being like, why have you shared this? And I was like, because you literally read it. Like, I passed it to him and he clearly hadn't read it, and he'd just be like, yeah, that's fine. And I was really hurt because although I wanted to be celebrated for this achievement, and actually what happened was I was judged and rejected. And I'd already got wounding around my dad leaving me when I was 4 that I was very present was like coming up for me. And it was really a reflection of that. Like, I was really expressing that wounding into the world. And I remember being at the time like alone in London in a flat that I shared with a housemate who'd also judged me and shamed me for my relationship situation. And I secretly wanted to celebrate my courage at being seen by millions of people. I mean, that's like huge. And whilst on the same breath, my whole world fell apart. I was getting divorced. I was feeling isolated. I was alone. And now on top of that I was being judged and rejected. And I remember my ex-partner sent me really nasty voice messages laughing at me for a video that I'd shared on social media, judging me as weird, shaming my voice when I was sharing a spiritual message. And he didn't understand me, and that was part of the reason why I was called to go on my own journey. And in other words, what happened was I was facing my deepest fear. I was sharing my spiritual voice to millions of people and being rejected by my family when I needed them and their love most. And I had left my marriage. They didn't agree with it. I even remember at the time asking them to stay at their house because I'd left my home, like my home life, later in the evening on a weekend, them refusing. I literally had nowhere to go other than to travel 2 hours back to my weekday apartment in London after negotiating that I could stay there at the weekend. And I've not shared this before because it feels vulnerable to share this truth, knowing that family could hear it again, they could be angry with me again for sharing this particular example. And yet that's super important that I do because it's very perfectly meta, a very perfectly meta example of she-wolf. I'm literally being her medicine by sharing this courageously and vulnerably now. And since I have worked deeply with she-wolf, there's been a deep reclamation of how I negotiated that with my family. Like, there was wounding in that for everyone, and there's a way that she-wolf has of being able to unconditionally love everyone in that situation. But back then, I remember feeling like I didn't know that. I wasn't consciously working with she-wolf. I was expressing her, but in her wounding. But I was feeling both deeply rejected and yet simultaneously having this conflicting sense of freedom with that within me. Because when I went back to that kind of weekday apartment, which my housemate had agreed I could go to for the night, I remember having this deep sense of how that particular life had felt to contain me. Though now I really do know that I'd innocently contained myself in that life. I didn't realise that at the time because I doubted my power. I didn't understand that I was in control of my life. Like, I've since journeyed with a whole load of like Orum's reclamation, gold reclamation of my power. That's helped me to see that in a different light. But at the time, like, I remember having this sense of like, I finally found my freedom. And what it did reveal to me was that I spent my life contorting myself into the box that my family and husband wanted me to be. I denied the parts of my soul that longed to travel, that longed to feel romance and soul connection, that longed to share my spiritual voice and become a leader in the healing field, that longed to escape the town that I'd grown up in and expand my horizons a little bit different, to experience a new place, to live in London. The parts that longed for a bigger, wilder life with more meaning and purpose. I'd shamed all of that. I'd shoved it into a box. And somewhere along the way, I'd outgrown that small life and longed for more. I longed to make a career for myself as a healer. I longed to explore the world. I remember sitting there that day and going for a walk around Queen's Park, and it was a beautiful day. It had sun shining through the trees, and the trees were just like waving through the sun was shining like through the trees that were just waving their branches. I seem to remember somehow, I was thinking about this, it's like, I'm sure they would blossom. I'm sure there's blossom on the trees. But I don't think there could be because it was October in the UK. But regardless, I remember sitting there thinking on this bench on my own, thinking everyone has rejected me. I've left my marriage and I should be feeling awful. And the biggest thing that I took away from that was I had this deep, perhaps the deepest sense of peace and freedom that I'd ever felt. I just sat there on that bench, like witnessing the beauty of the sun shining through the trees, and I felt bliss. And from that moment on, I began to fully own my truth and my wild expression to create my life my way. And just a caveat before, like, you think that, okay, we're just going to quit everything, run away to the woods. Like, just a caveat, it doesn't always require us, when we reclaim our wild, to obliterate our lives and run away to the woods in isolation to do that. So I wasn't consciously working with She-Wolf at this time, though I really was, and I didn't know it. I was expressing her, because at the end of the day, I always say to women that women tend to think, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to work with She-Wolf. What we don't realise is that She-Wolf's already an aspect of us. If we're feeling the call to her, she's already within us. It's just that likely we're expressing her wounding into the world rather than her gold. So what we're doing in the work of healing is we're reclaiming the golden expression of She-Wolf from our wounds. As we heal and alchemize our wounds, as we use her as a mirror to illuminate where we're expressing her in a way that's not gold, that's wounding. So I was expressing She-Wolf from wounding, and I could have healed and alchemized her remedy much better with guidance, but it had taken lots of little steps to heal and alchemize my wildness that led me to this moment. So there are lots of little steps up to the big steps, if there are big steps. But this particular moment I share feels poignant because there's such a deep emotion, a deep vulnerability, a courage present in it. It was an opening, a possibility, a beauty, a truth, an acceptance and love of myself in that moment that just feels so emotional to revisit. And it was like a softness to it too. It was like, okay, I have been rejected and judged by everyone I know, my worst fear, like my family, my friends, everybody, like nobody. I was completely on my own. And I've survived that. I'm still here. Nothing has got me. Like, I am free to just be me. I've got goosebumps as I'm saying that. Like, that deeply, deeply transformed my witch wound, my She-Wolf wounds. Like, just to know that I'm at the worst point of judgment and rejection. And I'm okay. Like, sure, I'm feeling a lot of feels, like I'm emotional, I'm sad, I'm feeling grief, I'm feeling loss, I'm feeling like the wounds of rejection and judgment, like wild emotions. I'm feeling them. And I remember journaling and journaling and journaling and journaling about how I was feeling. And still, I was okay. Because that's the thing, when we experience the very thing we fear, it opens up the possibility for us to heal it, to know that we're actually okay through it, that we can navigate it. And I began to navigate the rest of my journey from that place, creating life the way I wanted it. It led me to being with my soulmate, who is the love of my life. We're getting married in Bali this year, crazy. And having my dream home in a cute little village just outside London. So it's commutable to where I wanted to be. I love London. Don't ask me. Everyone's like, why London? Like, surely you want to get out of London. I'm like, no, my soul loves London. It led me to meeting soul sisters that became my community, my village. It led me to leading events across the globe to begin to share my magic. It led me to the deep soul reclamation that I've journeyed with to now be able to help other aspiring healers who long for their own sense of inner wildness, of their true authentic expression. It helped me to help them heal themselves and become an activator for women to heal themselves and reclaim their wild, to discover their unique gifts and to express them into the world. Like, none of that would have been possible without this healing of the fear of judgment and rejection. And I did actually come to work consciously with She-Wolf later. So I think maybe even a year later, began the journey of reclaiming my wild voice by birthing my Secret Witch Show podcast. It must have been a little bit later actually than a year later, maybe like a year and a half, 2 years. And began to share as a guest on other shows. I began to speak at events. I was sharing my own online events. I was working with women in group programs. I was working with women one-to-one. And all of this became the Archetypal Apothecary Path, which is the deepest expression of my unique gifts, the deepest expression of who I'm here to be, what I'm here to bring into the world. And so much magic has been created from that. I can't even express it fully. But sharing what I'd learned, seeing and seen as valuable in the path for healers to heal themselves, discover their gifts and express them into the world. And again, I navigated this self-expression wounding of judgment and rejection as I did that, as I began to open and share my gifts as a healer of healers as well. And so it's almost like if we're here for that wounding of judgment and rejection, we're going to spiral round and round it at different layers. Like we start off, we heal one spiral, then we move up to the next level of that, we heal that spiral, we move up to the next level of that, we heal the next spiral. A bit like I was talking about with like even illuminating that I'm here to be a healer. Okay, I'm going to heal and liberate some judgment and rejection around that, and then hang on, next step to express it into the world, which isn't the next step, but like it's more like a few steps down the line. But even still, like we meet that same wounding, judgment and rejection, she-wolf wounding again. But we've already got the evidence to inform our confidence at this point. We've already done this once. We've got this. And anyway, this is what happened to me. I was called a charlatan. I was called a cult leader. Again, like if you know me, you'll laugh at this and you'll be like, how? And each time I experienced this and navigated it as the material for my liberation that it was, I began to expand beyond this sphere of judgment and rejection to the next level, like expanding to the next and the next and the next level, like knowing that I was truly okay. And I'm still doing that. Like I always say, don't put me on a pedestal. I'm still journeying this same fear of judgment and rejection with she-wolf, like on a different level. For women, sharing it again, sharing my truth of that, for women who are just a little bit behind, like walking the same path. And that's the same for you. That's how your medicine works. And this really taught me to love the people who had judged me. This being called a charlatan, a cult leader, it taught me to love the people who had judged me because they were projecting their own wounds onto me. That was really serving to see. I worked really deeply with my own guide to see that, because we're all really walking around projecting our childhood wounding onto everybody else. And I could really start to see where that was happening. For example, this is something that I've come to love myself in enough to hold, and it's really important that I have, because it can be common when we're healers. Like, for example, in my group journeys for women, it can be common for women to project their mother wounding onto me. They can project their own wounding with their mums, especially in she-wolf, for obvious reasons that she's the mama wolf. Like, there's a mother archetype in that. And going through these projections of people projecting, when I've taught mother before in a different way, I can't remember what I taught. Anyway, that's beside the point. When I taught that before, going through these projections helped me to learn how to hold other people's projections onto me with deep unconditional love and welcoming of all of it. That takes an incredible amount of power. In my opinion, it's deeply rare, and it's also deeply important as a healer, if we're here to be real healers. I learned to hold myself. This is why personal healing is so important. We often want to skip that and jump to being a healer, but being a healer and becoming a healer requires us to learn how to hold people's projections and people's rejection and people's judgment on us. It requires us to learn to hold ourselves in our own stuff that would arise in others' projections on us, so that then we can move out the way and meet a woman where they are. And that's been my work for the last years, several years. I learned how to hold myself in my stuff and separate what was my stuff from theirs, so that I could move that out the way and meet a woman where she is with unconditional love, even and especially when projecting onto me. And this is super important and can be deeply serving to have a guide for who's been in that work. It's really important to vet your guides for whether they've been in that work, because it's also super challenging to navigate alone when we're going through the depths of material for liberation, or the healing that we're going through with this kind of judgment rejection piece. And I also learned to reclaim the truth in what others were projecting onto me. Was there anything that was true about what they were experiencing? So it's not just about being like, okay, well, they're projecting onto me. Like, is there truth in what they're saying that's helpful to us in our own healing? Was I really being a charlatan? Or what was I doing to be received that way? Could I be more vulnerable? Could I be more truthful? What had a woman received me as a cult leader? Like, how was I creating that? Was I creating that somehow? That's like owning our power to create even that. Like, how have I even created myself as a cult leader right now? Like, looking with love, truth, and honesty at our own wounds to make sure we love everything into liberation is so important. Includes even owning other people seeing us as cult leaders. And there was gold in that for me, but even more deeply, what that helped me learn was to begin to have unconditional love for myself. And that really is part of She-Wolf's main part of her medicine. Like, the more unconditionally loving we can be to ourselves, the more able we are to express our fullness. Like, we can only express what we've loved. And I couldn't have gone into that deep work of looking honestly without learning to love all parts of myself, including the shameful, supposedly shameful parts, the parts that had created someone else to view me as a cult leader. Could I love that part of me too? And that's really the tender first step we begin to cultivate as we work with She-Wolf's unconditionally loving, almost like self-mothering energy. Like, she helps us begin to meet those fears and own our wild expression. So there's like having that wild mama She-Wolf self-mothering when our wounds come up to be seen is so deeply important. And I went deep with that to reclaim my own vulnerable expression. So that's my invitation for you too. It's like a tender beginning step with healing your inner healer's fear of judgment and rejection, so that you can share your gifts authentically, loving ourselves. That is the first step. Learning to honor our truth, learning to be with truth for ourselves first, learning to welcome the messy, shameful, wild parts of ourselves, like our wild emotions that burst out when we suppress ourselves and we've played the good girl for too long. Can we love those? Like your truthful spiritual point of view that you share and someone disagrees with it, can you love yourself in that? Like your supposed weakness because you're sensitive and feminine, can you love that? Like your deeply wild feminine needs that you're being called to honor and feeling like it's impossible because you might lose approval. Can you love that part of you and choose it anyway? Like the parts of you that desire to go and dance naked under the moonlight when that feels unacceptable. Like, can you love that part of you? Like your desire to invest in yourself and prioritize your own needs before your family for once. Can you love that part of your wild self and see the benefits that could ripple out? Like your desire to open to your inner healer. Can you love that wild part of yourself? Or the part of you that longs to share your heart vulnerably in sisterhood and feels all the fear of doing so. Like, can you also love that part of you and take a tender first step? Like the part of you that longs to get married by a waterfall in Bali but feels all the fear of that big leap. Can you love that part of yourself? Or is that just me? I just put that, so maybe that was me. That was definitely me. Yeah, She-Wolf, Mama She-Wolf created that. And these things are all part of the She-Wolf reclamation of our wild truth and wild soul. Mama She-Wolf's wild, loving, nurturing energy helps us to choose the next tender step in our true, authentic expression. She helps us honor our no as well, so that we can choose our true, authentic expression. She's so beautiful. Okay, I'm going to go to questions now. So we've got a few questions from the group, which I love. I love that Wild has activated some questions. So the first question is, I'm still struggling with what others think about me. I've grown substantially these past couple of years, but I also have things about myself that I feel make me look weak. How do we handle these situations in a way that isn't negative feeling towards ourselves? This is a great question. It's a great example of a woman who has grown substantially and is now ready to heal her healer wounds, which is many will come into this path and be like, okay, I've done a lot of healing. Like, surely I should be healed by now. And it's like, Healing is never going to be done. I'm just going to put it out there. Like, that is not what you want to hear. She-wolf will speak wild truth that does not want to be heard. You are not going to be healed ever. Healing lasts a lifetime. We've come into this world with a soul plan to experience wounds that we will circle around at different levels of. And our healing is ongoing. Like, the second we think it's done, we need to heal the fact that we think it's done. Like, this is what I always say, like, I am still journeying into my own healing with you, alongside you. And so there's often women have come here, done a lot of healing. They've like got some sense of like, okay, this really helped me, I can help others. And then they hit the healer wounds and they think, okay, maybe I'm not cut out for this. This is not a sign that you're not cut out for it. And this, I'm going off here because I know this isn't the question. Not important. Like, this isn't a sign that you're not here to be a healer. This is a sign that we just have more healing to do. So to answer the question, before I go off too much of a tangent, is that, again, just going back to like wild mama she-wolf unconditional love, like, what is it that needs love? To help you go deeper, I've got questions for deeper inquiry for you here. So what is it that is creating the negative feeling towards yourself? So in response to that question, like, I've grown substantially the past couple of years, but I've also have things about myself that I feel make me look weak. How do we handle these in a way that isn't a negative feeling towards ourselves? Like, what parts of you are you judging as being weak? What parts of you are you rejecting yourself? What is the deepest fear? For example, just to give a context as an example, this may or may not be at all what you're feeling, but it's helpful to just kind of work this through. It's like, it could be that it's a fear of being weak, as you shared, but there may be other things that arise. And the invitation is to begin to reclaim and love these aspects of yourself. Like, anywhere we feel negative feelings is a call for love of this unconditional love of the she-wolf. And so that we can just fully express ourselves. If that makes sense. Please let me know, because I'd love to know what comes up for you there. But in essence, anywhere that, like, we're being invited to reclaim and love these aspects of ourselves so that we don't feel that they're weak or negative. And I suspect there are gifts in these things that you feel are weak about yourself. A common one, just to give another example, is women's sensitivity. So often women will judge, particularly women who are here to be healers, will judge their femininity as weak. And yet it's actually a deep gift to the world that is only known, like, our culture is only known push, force, hustle. So when we reclaim that feminine sensitivity, which often is judged as weakness, when we reclaim that as the golden gift it is, it becomes a much needed gift for the world, which, by the way, is starving for softness. And also, which, by the way, is also part of she-wolf's healing, because she's also sensitive and instinctive. So I'd love to hear what comes up there. Please do share more in the Secret Witch Society if that feels aligned when you've journeyed with it. Yeah, let me know. I'd love to hear what comes up there. And I'm sure that question will also be super potent for other women as well. So thank you for asking. I always think it takes so much courage to ask questions as well. Another question we had, and this is almost like two elements to this question, is how do you deal with negative comments on social media? And then I asked if there was a particular example, and she said, no examples, not really experienced negative or worse. It's just something I'm afraid of. You see it happening so much. Although I have had some comments that are maybe not negative, but questioning something I wrote, or pointing out inconsistencies, or telling their view in an I know it better way. That can make me feel insecure. Maybe I'm not so wise. Maybe I'm wrong. Who do I think I am? I love this question because I think, and again, both of these questions I think are like, women are going to so relate to these questions because many women will be feeling exactly what these women are saying here. There's like two elements to this question, so I'm going to speak to them in two different parts. The first part is the piece about how to deal with negative comments when we're actually getting negative comments on social media, so things like the charlatan piece. The second part of the element of this feels to be about questioning and like people doubting, people questioning. So they may not be outright asking, sharing negative comments, but they will be asking like, oh, are you sure? Like testing. So I'll speak to the first one first about negative comments. I've shared a little bit about this in this episode already, but to go a bit deeper, all of this, as I know this woman knows who's asked the question, all of this is what I call material for a liberation. Whenever we hit up against negative comments, they are here to help free us. So even if we did or do get negative comments, it's a bit like I shared in my story of judgment. We begin to learn that we can survive through these comments. And we can also use these comments to learn things about both ourselves and about others' projections. So in essence, when we engage with these negative comments as a kind of like a way of expanding through our challenges into our full world expression, like that's coming from a different place, and it's really helpful to hold them like that. And that said, I also am meeting you in a human place, which is like, that really sucks. And I have received personally many negative comments. Largely now I'll get, some strange men sometimes commenting on my post being like, why is this on my feed? This is a pile of crap. And I'm like, well, you've commented on it, so you're going to get more of it now. Thanks, algorithm. And yeah, I have often received negative comments, and largely now they rarely impact me in the same way as my first negative comment would have. I remember when someone said, "You're a charlatan," when I was first a homeopath, and it was on Twitter. I was like, oh my God, the world's going to cancel me. Like, I'm going to be banned from Twitter. And yeah, none of that happened. But especially if someone said you're a charlatan now, I'd be like, oh, bless their hearts. They have some interesting stories from childhood. Because I've journeyed with that. And I hope that inspires you into a way of being like, okay, this isn't about me. And yet it's also about us, because it's about our wounding. If we're responding to that kind of comment of like, you're a charlatan from a place of like, oh my God, I'm mortified, then it is about us because there's something in it for us. But if we can just be like, okay, bless their hearts, we know we've healed it. And still, having said all of that, I know the fear of that can be deeply paralyzing before we've got to that point. So the deepest invitation I offer here is, again, to be in that deep work of loving yourself, loving ourselves, and your full expression for yourself first. So maybe if it's too edgy, if it's feeling like, okay, I'm feeling the fear of getting negative comments and that's too edgy, it's like a 10 out of 10 edge, maybe don't share on social media just yet. Like, ease back. I would say meet your soft edge. Soft edge is about 7 out of 10. And like, at the same time, that's not to say that it is going to be too much of an edge for you. If it is a 7 out of 10, then start to lean into that, but from a really tended place. So She-Wolf again is about like learning to tend our animalistic body softly, tend our nervous system, so that as we begin to lean into sharing on social media, we're doing it from a soft nervous system, a tended nervous system that allows us to then hold ourselves gently if we do get negative comments. The other thing to share, just as a bit of a cheeky thing, is that most of my mentors have said that you're making an impact when you begin to get negative comments too. So it's kind of a good thing in some ways, just as an added bonus. But regardless of that, begin with the foundations of welcoming your own truth, loving yourself in that truth, with the She-Wolf Mama's unconditional love of self. Which ties into the second question about people questioning our truth. So there's an element of She-Wolf who just isn't available to be questioned. Like, as I say that, I can really feel that, no, I'm just not available for that. There's an element of She-Wolf who just is not available for questioning from others. She had this wild no to things that she's not available to give energy to. And that takes some cultivation. That takes some deep healing work. And she can really be a no to being questioned by others. There's a very detailed nuance to explain here around that, but essentially we can often be tempted to set harsh outer boundaries when it's actually our inner energetic boundaries that matter. So when we talk about having an inner no to things, like what we're available for, there's an inner energetic boundary that we need to make a choice. I am just not available to be questioned. In this case, it sounds like there's almost a deeper longing to set an inner She-Wolf boundary of a message not being questioned in this way, that part of you is still actually willing to innocently be available for energetically and give time to. Let me know if that makes sense. It's quite complex. We've gone very deep here, so let's zoom back out. I felt important to share, but zoom out. Let's start at the beginning. Part of the way that we can learn to not be available for questioning again, is to begin to love ourselves in our own truth. Like loving ourselves in our own truth is the most important thing. So unapologetic ownership and honouring of our own point of view. Like the work to do that is to look at, where am I shaming my own wisdom as not truth? Like, do I fully back myself in what I'm saying? Like am I inviting in the questioning from others? Like, am I doubting my message? How am I creating people to question my message? But like I said, with like, how am I creating people to say that I'm a cult leader? Like, how am I creating people questioning my message? Where are you not quite clear on your own truth being worthy or valid? Where are you shaming your own deep wisdom as not as good as someone else's? Which part of you feels insecure? That's the place that feels it's calling for some she-wolf love, so that you can begin to tenderly, unconditionally love your wild expression. I'm going to recommend that be a deeper inquiry for you to be with, and for anybody else who resonates with that question. And I'd love to hear what it brings up for you if you're willing to share that in the Secret Witch group. I'd love, love, love to hear that. So, okay, the practicalities of embodying she-wolf for healing our fear of judgment and rejection, so that you can share your gifts authentically. We are going to be embodying and working with that in our upcoming journey with Archetypal Looper, a she-wolf, in May. I think it begins May 2nd. So if you're really resonating with this episode, a next aligned action could be to join us. If that's still feeling like, okay, that's not quite aligned, it's not the right time, it's not the right thing, I'm not really resonating, that's absolutely fine. Also, you could get a taster for it by watching the replay of our She-Wolf Taster. So I'll share all the notes to that in the link in the show notes. The links to that in the show notes. There's some tender first steps there. But more deeply, regardless of whether you choose to join us in Archetypal She-Wolf or not, Archetypal Looper, what my invitation is as we complete this episode is to be in an ongoing noticing practice of where you're in the shadows or wounding of She-Wolf that we've illuminated in this episode. So maybe go back, like take some notes of like how She-Wolf shows up for you and what you're resonating with in this episode in terms of the wounding, in terms of the gold, and just start to love yourself in those as a tender first step. Like, where can you just be a little bit more tender, a bit more loving around the She-Wolf patterns? That's my invitation. I'm going to leave it there. I would love to hear how you get on with that. If you do feel called, please do join us in our Secret Witch Society Sisterhood. It's a beautiful community, beautiful group of women, and we would love to have you. We also offer you the opportunity to vote on topics for the podcast, as women chose this one. And all of you are so welcome in that group. Even if you kind of lurk in the background, as many women do, as you start to take those tender steps into Mama She-Wolf expression. I'm sending you all the love, and I will speak to you soon. I love this episode, felt really juicy. Here are my takeaways. The common fear of being a healer and being judged and rejected is part of the witch wound, which makes sense due to epigenetics and how we feel this fear ingrained in our bodies. The challenge with healing our fear of judgment and rejection is that we have to experience it to fully liberate ourselves from it. But we can take small, tender steps into learning to heal our expression rather than having to make big leaps that have us expand with a well-tended nervous system. The deep work of healing involves us learning to unconditionally love ourselves, harnessing archetypal Mama She-Wolf's or Looper's self-motherly energy. When we love ourselves deeply enough, others rejecting us can't have the same impact. There's a swing between the poles of good girl and rebel that is often needed as we begin to heal our fear of judgment and rejection and claim our true wildness. But the real alchemy is in the third way, the way of learning to be our true, authentic selves from love and vulnerability, bearing our souls as the medicine they are. If you'd like to get the show notes and links for everything we've chatted about in this episode, head to www.secretwitch.co.uk. If you know a secret witch who would love this episode, please share with them to help them liberate themselves. And so you don't miss out on next week's episode, head to your podcast app of choice and hit subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.